the intensity dials up to 11 in the space of like 2 hours, where you were on a ship for 10 days, you hop on a helicopter, and then you're in Antarctica and there's a storm coming.
In Antarctica, you don't wait for the perfect conditions. You take the window you're given, or you risk coming all this way for nothing.
I'm like, okay, well then you're going to be on the ship for at least another 4 or 5 days, because it's going to have to go all the way through the whole cycle of the weather being perfect again, and that can be 2 days or 5 days.
But making it to the site doesn't mean you're safe.
Yeah, we're more than a week from any help in this situation. We knew we were putting in our camp actually within 10 hours of a storm coming in. So we willfully got off the ship to set up into what was going to be a significant storm.
There's no backup, there's no rescue, there's no second attempt. Peter Neff and his team take these risks for something that you can barely see, but has the power to change our future.
That air gets trapped in the ice sheet as bubbles. There's no other place where you can get past concentrations of carbon dioxide. So we're pretty motivated to go there for those. Those little bubbles are a really unique archive of past atmosphere.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and season's greetings. Welcome to another episode of No Ordinary Monday with a fittingly icy story to match. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm your host, Chris Barron. And each week I sit down with a guest whose stories about their job are far from ordinary. We explore what things are really like behind the scenes, the lessons they've learned along the way, and then they're going to relive the wildest, most unforgettable story of their career. Now, before we dive in today, just a very quick note, this is our final episode of the year. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be taking a short break, just time to recharge, refresh, and refine the show as we head into 2026. We've got some really exciting plans for what's coming up for you guys, and I can't wait to share it with you all in the new year. And because it's that special time of year, I just wanted to mention one small thing. If you guys are feeling in the giving mood, there are 3 simple, easy ways that you can support No Ordinary Monday. First, you can leave us a nice review on your podcast app. It's quick, it's free, and it really helps the algorithm push us above the noise and get noticed by new listeners. Second, you can share the show with a family member or friend that you think would genuinely enjoy these kinds of stories. And honestly, word of mouth is still the most powerful way that independent shows like this can grow. And finally, third, if you're feeling really generous, you can buy us a coffee or a beer via our Buy Me a Coffee page. Your support is absolutely incredibly appreciated, and even a small contribution helps us cover the costs of keeping the lights on and running the show. You can find information on our website under the Support the Show tab, or you can head to buymeacoffee.com/No Ordinary Monday. All right, so today's guest is Dr. Peter Neff, a polar scientist, climate researcher, and university professor whose work takes him to some of the most extreme and remote places on planet Earth. Peter studies ice cores from Antarctica, ancient records of Earth's atmosphere that help scientists understand how our planet has changed over time and what that might mean for our future. But what makes Peter such a compelling guest isn't just the science, it's the human reality of this work. The logistics, the pressure, the responsibility, and the moments where decisions have real consequences. In this conversation, Peter takes us inside one of those moments and explains why doing this work and talking about it openly matters now more than ever. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get into the show. Awesome. Peter, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Where in the world are you at the moment?
I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Twin Cities, right smack in the middle of North America. So, at the University of Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of smack in the middle, but at the north. I've been to Minnesota in around November. It is freezing.
The winter is coming for us. It's coming tomorrow, I think, actually, this first snow.
Oh, really? I remember being there for a shoot, and it was some of the cold, the weather report wasn't that cold, but it felt so cold when we were out on the thing. And you've been to Antarctica plenty of times. Does Antarctica really, when you've got an icy cold day in Minnesota compared to Antarctica, are they comparable? Or is Antarctica
Absolutely,
another level?
yeah. they're pretty similar at times, and it can be pretty frustrating when you're coming home from Antarctica in January and you get here and it's still snowing and quite cold. But the thing about Antarctica is you're always dressed for it, so you're always prepared for it. You're not just
Yeah.
like walking out of the grocery store with a just a vest on or something and all of a sudden get blasted. But
Nice, nice. Well, I mean, one thing that I think stands out about you more than maybe many scientists is, and it's the sort of reason I actually sort of came across you in a sense, is you have an amazing social media profile.
thank you.
And I just wanted to start there because, most scientists might be known by, their paper and their journals, and you've done lots of amazing work there as well. But a lot of the public know you from all the stuff you post on TikTok and Instagram. I think you've got, is it like 200,000 followers on TikTok at the moment, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, somehow.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I wonder, just starting with sort of how and why that started and why you think it's so important to continue it.
Yeah, my participation in TikTok in particular came at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was actually contacted by a talent agency through Instagram, and my talent is dubious online. But TikTok was looking to bring educational content creators over to their platform as all of the schools were locking down in the United States, and their platform was blowing up. So certainly happy to dilute the sort of craziness of TikTok, the zeitgeist of humanity, with a little bit of icy science. So, at that time, I was probably the only person on TikTok who had content of, videos of field work in Antarctica. And of course, nobody was traveling. So it was a bit unique. And I've figured out how to balance, I guess, sharing some of the more exciting clips we have from Antarctica that can pretty easily go viral, and then mix that with some more actual depth of talking about what we do with ice cores that we drill in Antarctica and the records of climate that we get from them. So I think people really appreciate the sort of direct view, like everybody, nowadays I have an iPhone in my pocket all the time, so I can collect videos of what I'm doing. And yeah, it's sort of no frills and simple, but important to document. I think with more and more going on these days, I don't know that people really understand exactly how we do research in the United States, and that as a university professor, I get funding from the federal government, from the National Science Foundation, to go do research on behalf of the American people. And if we just sum that all up in a 3-page paper in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, I mean, nobody's going to see it, right? So outside of the ivory tower. So I think it's a great way to, right? Social media, for better or worse, has really democratized being able to say what you want and show folks what you're up to. And so, I mean, if I'm one of the few professors doing that, I feel okay about it.
No, it's brilliant. And you, as you say, it's TikTok is an interesting place, and but at the same time, you're directly linking yourself to a younger audience, which I think is phenomenal, because, as you say, a lot of scientists would do their journal work. Their journal work would go into journals and publications, and then maybe a science magazine, maybe a popular magazine may pick up on it. But again,
Yeah.
your demographic is completely different, and the work that you guys are doing is actually, ironically, probably going to impact the Gen Z population more than it will impact the older population. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, basically, but yeah, you're polar scientist, Antarctic scientist, but I guess the big question is, what questions are you guys going down there to answer? And I guess that is it's one thing explaining to someone, oh, hey, I go to Antarctica and I do a lot of work and research down there. And the next harder question is, probably keeping it simple for a lot of listeners out there, is, what are you guys going down there for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can get into what we're questions we're asking and trying to answer with ice cores, but from a sort of larger Antarctica perspective and United States activity in Antarctica, we do sort of three buckets of science in Antarctica. We do science that's about the place, helping us understand the 8% of the Earth's land mass that is Antarctica, how it works, and why it matters. We then also go there to try to understand Antarctica and its context in the broader world, how it interacts with global ocean currents or climate on the ice core side of things. and how processes in Antarctica really matter for the rest of us, because our through our atmosphere and ocean, our climate is really linked globally. It's just like society. It's a big, complex planet that we're lucky to live on. And then the third bucket is using Antarctica as a scientific laboratory. So what about the conditions in Antarctica might be ideal for particular science experiments? So those are the sort of big three buckets that motivate the science we do under the U.S. Antarctic program, and other national Antarctic programs would be much the same. And then those of us who are drilling ice cores, we're taking advantage of the fact that when a snowflake falls in Antarctica, it's so cold that it never melts basically anywhere in Antarctica, although around the coast, around the edge of Antarctica where it's near the ocean, you do get some melt in the summertime. So it tends to take us far inland, where we then have 500 meters, 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, even 4,000 meters of ice thickness to extract information from, because that ice only forms through falling snow. So the entire continent of Antarctica, which is on average, something like 1.5 miles thick ice, all of that started as snowflakes falling from the sky. And that is a huge archive of information. So in addition to that amount of fresh water locked up on a continent being important because it's a big control on global sea level rise, it also is layered information. I don't know why I went from bottom up here, but from top down, it goes from today back.
Yeah.
The ice core record as published right now, we have continuous ice cores going back from today through 800,000 years. It's a group of European scientists called the Beyond Epica project that have just finished drilling last season. And they think they have 1.2 million years of continuous time. And then I work as a part of a very large project in the US called Codex. It's 15 different universities, and we go to Antarctica. We map places where we think there'd be old ice. And we also go and we've recovered and recently published the oldest ice. So not continuous, but a sort of odd stranded pocket of 6 million year old ice that we have a team down there right now working to drill more cores and trying to find the best quality of that sort of 6 million year old ice. It's in a place where it really truly was preserved in an unaltered way. So
insane.
yeah, pretty fascinating. And not only is it ice and snowflakes, but a snowflake catches a lot of air space, right? A pile of snow, when it's fresh, it's nice and fluffy. You jump into it and it squishes down. That's air. That air gets trapped in the ice sheet as bubbles, and those are samples of the past atmosphere that are very direct, our absolute best record of past atmospheric composition. There's no other place where you can get past concentrations of carbon dioxide, the most important heat-trapping greenhouse gas. So we're pretty motivated to go there for those. Those little bubbles are a really unique archive of past atmosphere. Climate change is a tricky thing. People get all freaked out as soon as you talk about it. We're not going down there assuming that there's some screaming increase in temperature over the 20th century. Antarctic climate is really noisy, really complex, and really hard to observe because it's so large and our presence there is so limited that we don't have a lot of on-the-ground observations that are very long. So we have to use things like ice cores to fill in the gaps. That's one of the most fun parts of ice cores, I would argue, even just in the modern era, is, okay, well, people weren't at this spot that we find now is really, really important. So how can we go back in time and learn about the climate of that place? The only way is to drill ice cores, and we're lucky in Antarctica, that past information that fell out of the atmosphere, that snowfall, it's all there, and we can have to go to great lengths to go get those samples. And unfortunately, to do the chemical analyses to go from a snow core to a climate record, you got to bring the ice all the way back to labs. And that's a big, expensive operation.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes to the crux of it, is that it costs a huge amount of money to go out there, and resources and infrastructure and people and all those kinds of things, to go out there and get these essentially little bubbles of air, 6 million years or a few hundred years old. Yeah. And the value that you have basically the ability to answer questions that are really big and complicated from those little pockets of, little time capsules from past climates and stuff. Because I think a lot of people listening is like, climate change is extremely complex. It's a complex thing to try and understand, and a lot of controversy around it because it's, no one's got one clear cut answer. And you guys are going out there to try and, uncover a little bit of that. Is there a simple way of sort of explaining how those little pockets of air can sort of translate into, usable answers for like policymakers or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental, eye-popping result that international ice core science, I sort of tend to speak we as, royal we for all ice core scientists over the last 60 or 70 years we've been doing this sort of work. But, the community has produced eye-popping results from those air bubbles in the ice. And what that shows, in a rational world, a policymaker would see, okay, well, what is the last 2,000 years of carbon dioxide or methane, the two most important heat-trapping greenhouse gases, right? These greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere. It's like a blanket over Earth. If we didn't have any greenhouse gases, we'd be like the moon. We'd be freezing and boiling, depending on where the sun is. And if we have too much greenhouse gases, we're like Venus, and it's like 400 degrees and whatever. So we like greenhouse gases, right? This is all of these things can be true at the same time. Greenhouse gases are amazing. We really like the amount that we've had over, the last 10,000 years of human civilization, because this is what a policymaker would see, right? The last 10,000 years, the Holocene, it's when, we came out of the Ice Age, sort of entered a relatively stable climate. People started to band together and start growing crops. And here we are 10,000 years later. CO2 over that time from these air bubbles is basically flat. There's some variation. There's some early blips from human activity altering the greenhouse gas concentrations. And then you get to the late 1700s into the 1800s, right? You get industrialization, and the concentrations of CO2 go from about 300 parts per million, and they just start rocketing up. For 10,000 years, it's essentially flat. And then you increase the concentration of carbon dioxide by something like 40 or 50% in about 100 years. And you increase the concentration of methane even more than that, like 200%. And it's, so you put that on the last 10,000 years, and it's really abrupt. So the rate of change that we're imparting is really consequential, and that we then are very confident that it's additional heat being trapped by those greenhouse gases that otherwise was able to leave the atmosphere. We sort of exactly know what the problem is, and ice cores really do provide a critical direct perspective on that. There's no other way that we would have known what CO2 concentrations were before the year 1957, because that's when we started atmospheric measurements. And since then, it's just a straight up and up and up and up every year. So, ice cores and the sort of other, aspects of the body of evidence there present us with real clarity on the problem of global warming and the climate changes that it causes. We know exactly what is causing it. We know exactly what could abate it, right? If we stopped largely burning fossil fuels, we would not end up with warming. So then you get onto the cascade of arguments, trying to wiggle your way out of the problem, just like when your doctor, tells you got to change your behaviors to get your blood pressure down or your cholesterol. Yeah. I don't know why I'm saying this. But right, we can try to wiggle our way around it and just argue with the evidence. But the evidence is there and clear, and it's really frustrating to be an American climate scientist, because we simultaneously support the vast majority. A huge part of our global understanding is funded by all of our U.S. federal investments in Earth observing systems and greenhouse gas monitoring, and the world's largest Antarctic program that gives us, the capacity to work with our international colleagues to build that body of evidence. But then to be the most unwilling to, in an organized way, deal with this problem. It's just really incongruous, right? To have, we're at the peak, we're at the sharp end of all of our human societal development. We have all of this great information and understanding. We're not wondering why the planet's warming. We're just wondering when we're going to get serious and start dealing with the problem.
Wow. So your job is basically to provide the hard evidence, the hard facts for the policymakers to make decisions on everything from, like fossil fuel consumption to, everything that affects, what climate change is. And it's up to them and all the other factors involved to make those decisions. And so, as you say, because you're only looking at it from one perspective.
Right. And I would want to be clear too, that it's not as though we would as ice core scientists, continue to say to policymakers, okay, we need more ice cores to make this even clearer. We keep trying to clarify our understanding of how particular regions are going to change or how particular processes are working when we're looking at the details of those data. So we're going to keep chipping away at that. And we always need to have, a body of, we're a small community. There's a couple hundred ice core scientists in the world, but we need to be, around and still moving our research forward and being able to talk about it. So people aren't just wondering about this past thing. We're like, oh, at one time these people produced ice cores and we learned this stuff. We are here and we need to continue to make sure that our basic research, which is sort of foundational to our understanding of the problem of global warming, and we need to be speaking for it. And that again, is why I try to be out, having conversations like this, but also online. I don't want people to have to go to a textbook or a journal article to look at ice core data. It needs to be present. It's not what's going to solve the problem, right? At this point, what's going to solve the problem is figuring out how you incentivize building a global economy that can move away from heat trapping greenhouse gases and fossil fuel burning. But yeah, we will be here talking about our understanding so that people are clear that we're not just wondering why this is happening.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big things we love having guests on for is to share, a big sort of no ordinary Monday story. And, we chat before the call about yours, and I wondered whether you could share them with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we have targeted science questions in Antarctica that are about the place, we often need to get to a particular part of Antarctica. And, there's no time to go into the Antarctic Treaty System. There are no official territorial claims in Antarctica that are not put on hold by the Antarctic Treaty System. But for a multitude of reasons, different countries have sort of access to different parts of Antarctica, going by longitude around the continent. So there are times when we need to work, particularly with international partners, to get to places. And particularly if you're me and you're interested in studying the coast of Antarctica along the most remote coastline of Antarctica, at the very southern end of the Pacific Ocean, it's a place called West Antarctica, and it's where there are some really large glaciers, Thwaites Glacier, Pine Island Glacier, sort of the main two, that are changing. And as we've understood them over the last 4 or 5 decades, we see that they're in a state where if they start to retreat, if the front of the glacier starts to pull back, there's no place where it can stabilize and that retreat can stop. So we're really worried about that being irreversible, a possible climate tipping point. And so we've been trying to get a picture of this. This glacier is the size of the state of Florida, so it's no simple
huge,
feat.
Yeah, I've heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you wouldn't necessarily think to bring an ice core to a glaciology party. If you're trying to, understanding physically the geophysics of what this system looks like and how it moves, you don't necessarily need climate information for that. But increasingly, if we want to understand this system that's hugely complex and changing in time, it'd be great to know anything about it before we started looking at it. And, we took the first picture of Thwaites Glacier in 1947, U.S. Navy flying aircraft down there in the first Navy operation in Antarctica. And then we've gotten a pretty good view of it from satellites since the 1990s, including satellites that can show you how fast it's moving and things like that. But before then, we have no information. We have no climate observations. There's literally no research station along this coastline that's the length of the west coast of the United States. So ice cores then, to me, become really important. And so I've been trying to be the one ice core person that's sort of rushing towards this problem. It's like, okay, how can we gain some clarity by having 100, 200 year-long records to start, due to how challenging it is to operate in that region, that can tell us, how did this state of retreat for Thwaites Glacier begin? So we've been trying to get that. The downside of the coast of Antarctica is that, unlike the sort of headline for Antarctica, the coldest, highest, driest, flattest continent, the coastline is actually not flat, not dry, barely even cold. It's actually some of the wettest, snowiest parts of the world. So your layers of snow are more than a meter thick every year. So to get back 100 years, you're drilling 100 meters plus. So I've sort of been talking about this challenge of needing better climate records from Thwaites Glacier, and I've been talking about it for about 10 years. and managed to get it on paper about sort of 6 years into that. And colleagues in South Korea who have a really capable research vessel, the RV Iran, which almost always has 2 light helicopters on board. They reached out and asked how I was doing with this idea, and my response was, "Well, not great. I haven't really done anything." And through many conversations later with my colleague there, Young Chol Han, who leads their Ice Core program, we found our way on board that ship and positioned a U.S. drill and got drilling support from the National Science Foundation and our ice drilling program experts in drilling ice cores that are based just across the other state, University of Wisconsin. Got it together to get on that ship so that we could hop off and as fast as possible drill 150 meters deep, which is about as deep as we can drill with ice cores before the conditions start to get challenging for drilling and you need to upgrade to more complex systems that are heavier and such.
Logistics.
So
crazy,
yeah. And logistics are always crazy in Antarctica, and they tend to be sort of really slow, steady, plodding work, where if we're going through McMurdo Station, the largest research station in Antarctica, it's sort of, we're flying commercial to New Zealand and then on to McMurdo. That takes about a week. Then you're in McMurdo for a week to 10 days, getting all your equipment. It's like a sort of scavenger hunt and getting all your safety certifications. And then you move on, so you're already 3 to 4 weeks in before you even get to your field site. Go back to the icebreaker situation. You're flying off a ship. Any science cruise in Antarctica might start with a maximum of 30 days of science time. These ships tend to only be able to go out for something like 60 to 90 days before they need to come back to port. So you're confined by the capability of that ship, and essentially how much diesel it can keep on board, unfortunately. But then, your science time quickly starts getting whittled away from 30 days down to something like, 20 days. So there's a lot of things that the leader of a Antarctic research cruise has to be thinking of. And getting an ice core team off of that ship actually has never really been a part of that. So we were the first group to really fully try to go for it and get ice core as a consequence. And we had not only a U.S. drilling team, but the Koreans were ready to collect a core as well. And so we hopped on that ship in Littleton, New Zealand, which is a port on the South Island of New Zealand that supported Antarctic expeditions going back to the very early 1900s. Transit then across, sort of diagonal across the South Pacific for 8 or 10 days.
And I'm guessing a lot of seasickness for some of the newbies on board.
Almost everybody, yeah. I am pleased to tell you that I, at least in that case, did not get seasick at all. So I was feeling great. Got very lucky.
It's the roughest seas in the world down that way, isn't it?
Yeah, you often have to choose whether or not you're going to try to go in front or behind a storm system. And our crossing was not particularly dramatic, but still, it's still big waves, and icebreakers are not made for the open ocean. They are made with a shallow keel so that they can ride up on ice and break it.
Bobbing all over the
so
place.
They can be rocky. Yeah. So you want to be on the lower decks that often unfortunately goes by seniority. So the senior people are up at the top and they're going back and forth, getting real sick. And so we went with this ship. I mean, there are pictures behind me if you can see of this red ship, and you can sort of see the edge of the ice behind it. And that's how close you get. You get within 1 kilometer of our targets, and then you open up the heli deck and put the blades back on the helicopters and you get ready to go. So
but you might as well be a million miles away, because I know from experience with a helicopter, you need pretty much perfect conditions before that thing's going to go in the sky. And I can imagine that area is not particularly conducive to nice flying conditions for a heli.
Yep. Not only do you need it not to be sort of stormy, windy, snowy, you need it to be basically blue sky. The images behind me are all quite bad, actually. So you can sort of see the fuzziness there. If there's cloud above snow, your pilot's not going to have good ground reference, and that's incredibly dangerous and has led to a lot of the aviation incidents in Antarctica. We're more than a week from any help in this situation, and so flying with the helicopters like this is, really, really high consequence work. And so the Korea Polar Research Institute, everybody on that ship has pretty good systems in place for that, and great pilots that they work with. So we were able to, get our equipment off the ship without too much difficulty. We got very lucky with the weather, and we knew we were putting in our camp actually within 10 hours of a storm coming in. So we willfully got off the ship to set up into what was going to be a significant storm.
Jeez, you knew it was
And
coming, but it was your only weather
yeah,
window to actually get off the ship.
yep, yeah, because if you want to wait, you're like, oh well, we don't want to have a stressful time out in a storm. You're like, okay, well then you're going to be on the ship for at least another 4 or 5 days because it's going to have
And
to go all
that's
the way
game
through the whole
over.
cycle of the weather being perfect again, and that can be 2 days or 5 days.
That'll ruin your mission.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and there goes all of your time. So
Yeah.
we managed to do it, and we knew that if we got off, we would have something like 10 days to work with, which is just enough to do our drilling. So we did take 36 hours weathering the storm, and my team, I had a graduate student with me. We were in very light mountaineering tents, which were almost too light, but they survived.
I
And
mean, are you able
we
to
lo-
sort of explain what that's like being in that kind of tented environment? Obviously, in an Antarctic storm.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great even if you've experienced it before. So, I've been in these settings or in the mountains in British Columbia drilling there, and I've experienced that being at the point where you're worrying about the structural integrity of your tent. Um, and that was one of the failures that I made as a leader on that. Where my graduate student was coming into that experience for their very first time, and went in this mode where the intensity dials up to 11 in the space of like 2 hours, where you
Yeah.
were on a ship for 10 days, never having been to Antarctica. You hop on a helicopter, and then you're in Antarctica, and there's a storm coming. So
Yeah.
so
It's quite
that
time.
experience is very different. So I know that that was really impactful. They were more or less confined to their tent, and actually their tent got clogged up with snow. So we ended up keeping them in there, and rather than dig them out and have bring them into another partially collapsed tent,
Oh
I
my
elected to just have them stay in their tent. But yeah, our larger tents, large tents have large surface area, and so they really struggle in significant storms. So our bigger tents got pushed over and then covered with snow, which
What?
is not great, but it's better than them breaking and blowing away and all of your equipment
Yeah.
getting buried or scattered into the wind. So
Oh my God.
we ended up with from one of these big dome tents that's very large. We ended up with
Yeah.
sort of a half moon of tent poles that were holding it up, and so most of us sort of just crawled in there and managed to have some hot cups of coffee and just hang out waiting for the storm to get better.
Oh
And
man,
so
that sounds
it's a great,
intense.
yeah. And you're wondering, am I going to even get anything out of this? Are we gonna, we're gonna have
Yeah.
time to get the samples and all of that? Um, but there's nothing, you don't have anything else to do. So as soon as things start to clear up, you start to pull your cargo out, make your cargo into a big pile for a storm like that, and you just start putting the pieces together. Okay, well, how choked with snow are our generators? Let's start working on those, and we very quickly were able to move into drilling mode, within the next day.
Yeah.
Um, and this is, that the sort of sprint style. So we knew we were only going to be there for something like 10, 12 days, ended up being 13. And that's barely enough time to get the drilling done. So you just get on with it. You don't have to worry about anything like downtime or what are we going to do to entertain ourselves. There's none of that. We're going to be, if we're not drilling, we're going to be eating or sleeping. And there was plenty of time. We ate all that we needed to. Our Korean colleagues brought boxes and boxes of food from Costco in South Korea.
Nice.
It's really good. They kept, for us, it's a really recognizable thing, the Kirkland brand. And anyway,
Yeah.
so we quickly got our tents knocked up for drilling, and drill set up, and it was just sort of off to the races. So we set up the U.S. drill, and then the Koreans set up their drill, and got to know their drill is actually brand new. And it's then just that tedium of working with the system, but doing everything as precisely and intentionally as possible, so that you don't break anything, you don't drop anything down the borehole, you don't, and you're just drilling, and then we logging the length of the ice cores and bagging them and boxing them, and just getting everything geared around like, okay, get the samples and let's get ready to get out.
Yeah.
And so luckily things proceeded without much drama on the drilling front. Drilling 150 meters deep is not that wild for us on the spectrum of what we do with ice cores. We just needed to have enough time to do it, and so for 7 days straight, we just do that, and really just troubleshooting generator problems that were caused by having our usual 5 kilowatt Honda generators. They don't like being bathed in snow and snowstorms, so they had some electrical issues the whole time you were using them. But you become an expert in generator maintenance.
Yeah, I was about to say, is someone, because there's, like I say, there's barely any support, so everyone's got to be multi-talented,
Yeah.
multi-operational. You've kind of got to be chef 1 minute, mechanic the next, scientist the next, mentor the one after that.
I'm pretty handy with a Honda 5 kilowatt generator now, so I better get one for my house. If anything ever fails. But and we're lucky. We did. We had that equipment, the generators from the U.S. Antarctic program, and we had a satellite phone from the Antarctic program, so I could call up Tony in the machine shop at McMurdo Station, and try to describe to him what's going on. But we also have entered, and I've unfortunately contributed to this, entered into a new era of communications in Antarctica where we use Starlink now. Actually, I'm the first one to have brought Starlink to Antarctica. I worked with SpaceX just before it went commercially available.
Wow.
And so now we can just use our phone and just Google it on YouTube. I'm watching troubleshooting videos. How do I remove the ground fault interrupter on this generator because it's not working with our drill equipment, and describing issues. And in the end, we figured out that the electronic computer controlling our throttles was just faulty because of the snow and the moisture. So we had to just unplug the computer part of it, and I ended up just using my fingers by the end of controlling the throttle.
Wow.
So in the end, the biggest challenge we had was generators, and not any of our specialized drilling equipment or whatever.
Yeah. It'll get to that point where you can just live stream and be like, "Hey guys, this is the problem," and someone in the comments be like, "Oh hey, this is what I'm doing in real time, telling you what to do."
There's a frontier. I could do the first Antarctic ice core project on Twitch or something.
Yeah, you got to break that.
I don't even know anything about that platform, but
amazing.
Yeah, so this is it was a really end member experience doing the work from the South Korean icebreaker, and just a lot of newness. I've been to Antarctica 7 times before that or whatever, but the understanding how to operate from a ship environment and the multilingual, multicultural aspects, are really exciting, but also can be challenging. And so luckily for me that the pilots were both native English speakers, and so we worked together closely on the aviation side of things, the timing worked out that the ship was able to continue doing science relatively nearby while we were drilling off at our site. And so we were just in regular contact with them about when it made sense for them to come back. And we all just worked as hard as we could to get to our 150 meter targets, and both teams did. And then, quickly, high five, have another meal, and then after a sleep, start packing things up immediately.
Yeah. Hightail it out of there.
Yeah. So we were drilling for 7 days. We were on site for 13 days. And you're just right back to the ship. So as soon as they came back, we also managed to get a really nice weather window where in 4 or 5 hours we pulled everything back. And each of these is swinging. You have 2 helicopters flying simultaneously, something like 15 flights back and forth to the ship. It takes about 15 minutes to get back. So it's just this constant 3 or 4 hours, and I'm running around. I was managing the helicopter operations down to I was slinging every load of cargo, underneath the helicopter, connecting it. And
long lines.
Getting shocked by all of the static electricity under the helicopter. And just the absolute most gratifying accomplishment, and with my partner Young Chol, just his willingness to stick his neck out and convince his colleagues that they could do this mode of ice coring from the ship, which they had never done. And we are the first fully icebreaker and helicopter supported ice core project in Antarctica, and the whole ship contributed. Once we were slinging back boxes and boxes of ice actually cut down to a half meter. Usually we ship our cores in 1 meter, but all the corridors of the ship and the freezers are quite tight.
Oh no.
But everybody on board, we actually have no photographic evidence of this that I'm aware of. Everybody made fire chains from the helideck down to either freezer, which one is in the front of the ship, the other's in the back. You can tell I'm not a sailor, the bow of the ship or whatever.
The bow and the stern. Yeah.
But everybody made a fire line of these boxes are like 50 pounds full of ice. But to as quickly get them from the helideck into the freezers, and then the ice cores stayed in the freezers actually for about 5 months before the ship got back to South Korea.
Oh damn.
So well-traveled ice. And yeah, we're still, we're just at the stage where we're about to learn what the chemical records from analyzing the first core. The Korean group has measured the chemistry of a lot of these already, and we're about to figure out what we have. We know the timeline that we have. So the cores got back to about the year 1920. And again, back to that high level question of like what information are we producing for policymakers? One of the things that they measured first in the core, which we didn't really plan to, was the greenhouse gases, or at least methane in the air bubbles in the ice. Our sites are not really optimized for that, but because it's so snowy on the coast, you get really high resolution trapping and fast trapping of the gases. So our cores now are the highest resolution and newest records of methane from Antarctica. And again, they show, just this rapid rise in methane.
Everything
that's
says the same thing.
Yeah, that's trapping heat, and it's our issue. And we go back to that. I've worked on other projects where we're trying to study that same problem. Actually, the methane is luckily removed from the atmosphere about on average in 10 years, which is really good because it's an even more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So the unseen human effort and stress and trauma, frankly, that goes into collecting these samples is never really well represented by the final publications that we provide. And that's it's a challenge, and I understand why, but that again feeds into my continued desire to sort of show what it takes, show so people can see themselves in the work. Like, yes, obviously not everybody's there on the ship, but everybody can relate to the different jobs, and connect with people online. I have a guy I follow who's a captain of some of the Great Lakes cargo vessels, and he sees my videos, and when he sees the ships, he's like, oh man, I got to get myself down there sometime. I want to do a rotation on one of these ships. But he sees his career, his specialty in what we do, and it really does take all sorts of folks. And I just can't believe it's my business to be doing this work, but it's pretty exciting stuff.
I mean, if you had to distill it all down into sort of one singular potent message of what you're trying to get out there on TikTok or to the policymakers, or through your work and social media stuff, what is that sort of most important singular message to get out there?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I use videos of Antarctic field work quite a lot in my social media, and maybe part of the point of that is we are all humans, and we're all working together. I mean, in the best case, on this collective project of our global society, or in my specific case, on our collective desire to go ask difficult questions and hopefully answer them in Antarctica. But we're all of the work that we do as scientists is designed for the public. Science serves society. We're not serving a subset of society. We're trying to understand the Earth, like, in the most cynical way, so that we can take the most advantage of it, so that we can use our understanding to our advantage to have stable societies that provide all of the basic needs for all of their citizens, and that are not only doing that today, we're planning on how to do that next month, next year, next decade. And so that, our scientific understanding feeds into that portfolio of information that you need. If you're the leader of a city, of a state, of a country, you need to be worrying about people's day-to-day needs. And certainly I don't expect that climate change really ranks highly on anybody's day-to-day needs, right? People are trying to feed themselves. People are trying to, make sure they're in good health. But their leaders certainly should have information from, the scientific community, so that they're not only thinking about today, they're looking down the road and using all the information we have from our, world-leading scientific research and innovation engine in the United States. We do that with public funding, with federal funding in the United States, where the federal government, through agencies like NIH or NSF, fund university researchers to do that, applied and basic research, the stuff where we don't know where the applications are necessarily going to come in, and where it's much more applied. My colleagues at the medical school doing cancer research and vaccine research. All of that, is also out there publicly funded, so that people can commercialize it, and businesses can act on that information as well. So it's not, that public funding is really key, so that nobody's hoarding the information just for themselves, so that Amazon is funding our climate and health research so that Amazon can make the most profit of it. It's public funding for public good. And I think people are not fully seeing, what they're getting, the return on investment for all of these federal investments. But it's designed so that, yes, we pay for it, which is tough to stomach at times. But we pay for it so that it's ours to act on, and ours to take advantage of, and use for whatever we need. So it's a challenging time as a scientist right now, where trust in experts and scientific information is being eroded. And so I think, a solution to that is certainly not to just keep doing what we've been doing for the last few decades. Clearly, we need to be engaging with people in different ways, and not just staying in our lane or on our campuses, but at least getting out on social media. It doesn't always feel very real being on social media, but
No,
talking
but
to you, I mean, this is where the real conversations come in, and I think that is an antidote to a lot of our challenges right now is conversations.
I think 100%. And what I do love about your social media is that people are asking you questions, and you are very diligent in giving them, clear answers. And, that's great as I say, to immediately get, information out to the public and have their trust in science, rejuvenated. But then hopefully they then spin out and find interest and find conversations like this to have a deeper dive and understand really more behind the scenes of what's going on and stuff, So I think it's admirable what you guys are doing. But I think one thing that kind of came to mind there, and I don't know, are you familiar with the Isaac Asimov Foundation series?
Ooh,
The books. It was just, I might cut this out, but it was just, anyway, the Isaac Asimov, big science fiction writer, but he has a very similar thing. It's it kind of reminds me of the climate change aspect of things, which is, there's this problem coming to the, it's in the series, to the Galactic Empire. He can see it coming 1,000 years in advance, and he's trying to tell the leaders of this massive problem, and they're kind of going, it's imaginary, essentially. So that there just seem to be some sort of very interesting parallels with a problem that you can foresee in the numbers, but people don't always see it necessarily tangibly in their everyday lives, and they just continue as they go forward. And it just seems to be a very difficult thing to get people to think in century scale rather than, election term scale.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And those different timescales of decision making, and having a lot of decision making in our certainly in our national elections be about how to win the next election. It certainly feeds into our inability to deal with those tricky longer term problems. I'm not naive to the fact that just focusing on all of our problems and challenges is not going to be good politics, but there's a lot of pressing challenges out there that we're not being very serious about, and at some point we're gonna have to deal with it. It would be nice if we dealt with it before it comes right up on your front door and all of a sudden is an irreversible problem. And the last thing that climate scientists want to be saying is we told you so. But we have the information, and we're out. We're not giving up. It's never too late to be, changing our habits around working with fossil fuels and carbon emissions. But the time is now. So, we have the punchy ways of summing all of this stuff up. But, we know what the problem is. We also know that it's never too late. So, if you're veering off the road, there's not really an appropriate moment to ever just like throw up your hands and let let Jesus take the wheel or whatever. We're in the driver's seat here.
Yeah.
I think a lot of
100%.
people also have a problem maybe considering that we're like fully in the driver's seat when it comes to Earth's global climate, but like, no, we really have globally impactful, imprints on Earth's climate for better or worse. And that's disappointing because the impacts are negative right now, but it's also an opportunity. We know, for modeling climate change out to the end of the century, sea level rise or temperature increase or any of those things, the biggest uncertainty right now by the end of the century on how much sea level rise you're going to have, it's not, are the models working or is our understanding of sea level rise good enough? It's what are humans going to do? We are the biggest uncertainty in that modeling right now. And again, that gives us agency. We are in control of our destiny there for the coming centuries. And I hope that we get real organized leadership around that sooner rather than later, because we just certainly are devoid of real serious leadership on dealing with that problem right now. And it needs to come not just from politicians, but also just from my U.S. view, it needs to come from corporations and leaders across the board. University leaders, our Fortune 500 companies. It's a large part. All of these organizations that are struggling to all work together to agree that we need to tackle this change and make an opportunity of it. It doesn't have to just be a negative. And what I think somebody said recently is, climate scientists want to kill all the cows, or you can't eat your hamburgers or whatever. Obviously we want to do things in as organized of a fashion, but it needs to be done at some point in a way that's going to make our future less challenging for everybody.
100%. I mean, as I said, this is an issue that's going to outlast our lifetimes, and so I guess in terms of a message to the next generation, kids that might be listening to this who, are interested in becoming polar scientists. I mean, what advice do you have for them? And I guess as a second part of that question is, what advice in getting into the industry or into this work, line of work, but like also how do they break through to those people in a way that, we've been struggling to so far?
Yeah, again, I mean, if we could have serious conversations with our leaders, I would say that it does a massive disservice to disparage our expert scientists and federal workers across the United States. I think thinking of future generations, people wanting to get into this, it's obviously a niche area to get into, but the polar workforce is probably tens of thousands strong in the United States. So think about your expertise, and it's probably needed in some area of the polar workforce. If you are particularly motivated for any aspect of polar science, I'd say it's going to be more your passion, your motivation, and your focus that gets you into a career rather than being the most brilliant person in the world. I am not the most brilliant person in the world, but I put together these experiences and I maintained focus and, didn't make too many mistakes along the way to remain in the career. And again, that theme of like, don't get trapped in your shiny rectangle here. Reach out to people. I have people reach out to me all the time on social media, and the only downside of that is I don't know how to track all of it to make clear to my employers, right? I still have to do work to stay in this career too, of like, hey, this time I'm spending on social media is not for nothing. And I think there's a large I already have students who want to work with me and people coming to me who convey that they know about ice core science and polar science from my social media. I mean, I have been doing it now for
That's great.
5+ years.
Yeah.
And it has an impact. So yeah, and I think too, whether or not our mode of funding science in the United States, if so much coming from the federal government is not how it's going to happen going forward. We will need to find other ways and ways to, in the private sector, support continuing to be leaders in the polar regions. But I'm hopeful that we'll understand that our long-term investments in Antarctic science in particular, which are roughly 70 years long of continuous high-level operation in Antarctica, that nobody's proposing even changing that. There's no proposed change to our ability to operate in Antarctica. There are very impactful proposed changes to our university researcher access to funding to pursue science in the polar regions. But our ability to operate down there has, a lot of commitment. It needs more resources because it is aging and falling behind a bit, but nothing that's not insurmountable yet at this point.
Absolutely. Amazing. Peter, I think that's an amazing place to leave it. And I always at the end just like to offer guests a chance to sort of plug what you're up to, where people can find you, obviously your social media. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I am icy_Pete on social media. So I share on Instagram,
Nice.
TikTok, and a little bit on Blue Sky, a little bit on LinkedIn. That's another one where I would encourage folks to network on LinkedIn. If you're interested in polar science, follow folks who are in polar geopolitics, polar affairs to sort of learn what's going on. The biggest project we have going on in Antarctica is the NSF Coldex project, which is on Instagram and LinkedIn. We got actually an employee of mine, Martin Froger, is down there. He's also sharing personal content on Instagram that is incredible.
Oh, nice.
He'll be down there for the next 6 or 7 weeks until January.
Are you kind of training some of your colleagues in the social media skills?
Well, yeah, and I'm trying to convince my colleagues that we need to resource the social media side of it. So Martin actually is the first time we've sent somebody to the field who's nominally, 50% a part of the team working with ice cores, 50% capturing content, creating content, and putting it out as they're down there. So, I've done that on the fly as I'm trying to lead teams, but my focus is not on that. So we're trying to give it good focus, and especially with, we have very few science projects going on in the U.S. Antarctic program right now because of how tight budgets are. But NSF Coldex is sort of it's one of our 2 ice core projects in Antarctica right now. It's a very big project and one that we hope continues if it's renewed for the next 5 years. We're waiting to hear on that decision. But 6 million year old ice, they're right back there with better drills, actually with some of the world's best ice core drillers, and they're trying some new things this season to get better quality samples and find nice, clean, old ice. That'll give us, each time we do this, 6 million year old ice, 6 million year old air, 6 million year old temperature estimates, those all end up being tests for our models of climate. If they can't reproduce what we observe from the Antarctic ice, they're not fully working. And so we use the ice core past climate data to train our models to make sure that if they can replicate what we understand the past conditions to have been and the present, then we trust them as they try to project into the future what conditions are likely to be.
Amazing. And obviously now not only better science and better data, but people can now follow it more closely with all the social media stuff, with someone more dedicated, which I think is fantastic. Yeah.
So look for Coldex STC on Instagram, and there's lots of great stuff coming out. And I try to share reposts from any of my polar colleagues as the field season's going on. There's a drilling team going at Dome Fuji, our Japanese colleagues. There's our European colleagues who are mostly doing lab work these days on the core they've already drilled. But yeah,
Amazing.
I try to be a hub to just share everything. I'm not making money on my social media. I'm just trying to make sure people see what we're doing in the polar regions.
That's it. Absolutely. Awesome. Peter, listen, thank you so much for taking the time today. And I really enjoyed the conversation. Super fascinating. And I'm wishing you and your colleagues all the best down in Antarctica.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I've really enjoyed talking with you as well.
And that's a wrap on this year's final episode. A huge thank you again to Peter for taking the time to share his incredible work and experiences in Antarctica. And of course, a big thank you to you guys as well for listening and watching, not just today, but throughout the year as well. I really do appreciate you guys being here. We only started a few months ago, back in August, but the show and the audience has grown so much already, and I'm just delighted to keep bringing you guys these amazing stories week after week. If you'd like to dive deeper into Peter's work or follow what he and his colleagues are doing down in Antarctica, you'll find all the links in the show notes and over on the website, noordinarymonday.com. You can also find extra clips and visuals from this episode across our socials. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and of course the No Ordinary Monday community page on Facebook, where you're always welcome to come and join the conversation, ask questions of guests, and share your thoughts on the show. Now, just a very quick reminder that we'll be taking a short 2-week break over the holidays. It's going to be a chance to recharge and refresh, and also prepare what's coming next for you guys in 2026. When we come back next year, we have already got some incredible guests already lined up for you guys, including a bush pilot from Papua New Guinea, a Médecins Sans Frontières doctor who's worked everywhere from South Sudan to Sierra Leone, and a mortician, just to name a few. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you are, and we'll be back with new episodes in January. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode and feel like doing one small good deed before the year wraps up, you can leave a quick rating or review. You can share the show with a friend or family member, or if you're feeling especially generous, you can support the show via the Buy Me a Coffee page on our website. No matter how you decide to support us, it genuinely helps keep the show going and keeps us motivated to making great stories week after week. And that's it for this year. This show is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the holidays, take care of yourselves, and we will see you next year.